You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Force 13 Live covers Tropical Storm Delta, which is intensifying, potentially at a significant rate in the Caribbean Sea southwest of Jamaica this afternoon. Last National Hurricane Center update had 60 miles per hour, pressure of 998 millibars, a hurricane warning in effect for Pinar del Rio in Cuba. Hurricane watches and tropical storm warnings also in effect elsewhere. The storm is expected to continue northwestwards through the Caribbean Sea, the Western Caribbean, and then into the Gulf of Mexico. Models suggesting it could be a significant hurricane and will still be one by the time it reaches, yet again, the US Gulf Coast. Not sure exactly on what track it will take just yet, but that's what we're here to discuss tonight amongst a few other things as well. Gamma looks like we'll be weakening to a depression at the next update, and Tropical Storm Chan-Hom in the Western Pacific, which could be a typhoon threat to Japan as well. And we might have some comment about where we go from here at this point in the season in the Atlantic, because it certainly isn't a done season yet, even after we get through Delta. And who knows what that's going to do, but let's focus home in on what's happening right now. And I think Recon are in the storm, and I don't know if any of our team can bring us the latest information, but if anyone's got that right now, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Kay can talk about it as well, because he's really in-depth reconnaissance aircraft, but they are indicating a storm stronger than this morning. Kay can reiterate this, of course. They are finding a storm stronger than this morning, of course. The 2 p.m. update was 60 miles an hour sustained. Recon in the northwest and southeast quadrants are indicative of a storm around 65 miles an hour. That's probably what the National Hurricane Center will go with at the next update. A storm that's definitely improved in structure over the past day and is continuing to strengthen.
There it is right now, the Mesoscale Imagery. This is 1 minute imagery from the GOES 16 satellite of this storm, which is currently still moving, well, it looks like south of the National Hurricane Center's projection.
Yeah, a little bit to the south, based on the center fix found by Recon, and notably as well a pressure at least 10 millibars lower than what they were saying at 2 p.m. That doesn't necessarily mean that the storm strengthened at a rate of over 3 millibars an hour over the past 3 hours. That's just indicative that the pressure estimate earlier today was higher than what the actual pressure of the storm was at that time.
Yes. And the model also mentioned, I don't know if this is mentioned, but there were 65 knot winds found in the eye wall.
That'd be miles per hour, not knots for now. It'd be 55 knot winds, SFMR, which is indicative of 65 mile an hour. Based on surface readings.
So putting this into perspective, this has been, when did it get named now? I'm totally losing track.
8 a.m. today, I think?
This morning. Asleep, I think. So 40 miles an hour this morning, and now you're saying it might be 65 or 70.
Yeah. Unless they get a stronger reading in the northeastern quadrant, there isn't really anything sufficient enough for them to go past 65 miles an hour at the next update. So their full intensity is really going to be based on whatever they get in the northeastern quadrant. If that's higher than everything else you've gotten so far, they could try to make an argument for it if the data is supportive. But right now, the maximum they can go with is about 65 miles an hour, which again is still quite substantially stronger than this morning.
Yeah, and they've also been dropping some drop zones in there, and at least from what I've been seeing, we're getting data that supports a pressure around 987, 986 millibars. That is significantly lower than what they've had it this morning, so I guess the readings that we're getting are quite surprising.
Here's some imagery of the storm throughout the course of today, the infrared floater, and you can see how it's been developing. What would you say about the storm structure, and some indications that it's going to have a pinhole eye. Is that what they were saying? Is
Well,
that
it's
confirmed?
a very small structure. It has a very compact tropical storm force wind field, and that's very concerning, especially given it has a evident eye wall, and it's likely not a hurricane at the moment. So to have such a good structure at such a comparatively low wind speed
Hmm.
is not good for what the storm may do in the future, being so small in such a favourable environment. And at the moment, moving slower and further west in the forecast.
Yep.
That
gonna
is
give it
something that,
a lot of time
Kay, me and you
to
have been
intensify.
speaking for a while today about what the storm's intensity is going to be and for how long, and you think that the storm will be weakening on Friday, but well, if it's going slower than expected, I put to you that it might not be so weak. It's still at that point.
Yeah, and while we know what point geographically it will start to weaken, if it keeps moving slower like it is, it would take longer to get there, and that means a stronger peak and a higher intensity if it weakens the same amount.
Now you can see here with the National Hurricane Center's cone on the left-hand side, that's the 2 p.m. Intermediate Advisory 4A, and you'll see there that the first part of the track is a bit crooked there because it used to be straighter, but National Hurricane Center on the Intermediate Advisory updates the position only and not the forecast, so quite clearly it's going south of their forecast, which is why it's been knocked out of joint. And that certainly has interesting connotations for some of those areas under the warnings, considering it's got a very small wind field. Much further towards the west might put the Cayman Islands in the clear, and some of Cuba that are currently under the watches, and would then put the Yucatan at much higher risk. And quite surprised myself, and some people have noted this, that the Yucatan don't have warnings in association with this. They do with Gamma.
But then again, Gamma is right next to, is right offshore from Yucatan, and also
Maybe it's because the warnings are already there for Gamma. They just haven't included it on this graphic for Delta. I don't know.
There's a couple points to consider. One is that, and then the second part is that, at least at this point in time, much of the convection and thunderstorm activity is just placed to the south and east of the center. It's not really on the western side as much yet, which is one of the reasons you see that very small wind field, particularly in the northwestern quadrant. I think, Kay, you're saying, based on the readings that it got, that it was under 30 miles of tropical storm force winds away from the center on that northwestern side. You know, it's similar.
Northwest side's very small.
Yeah, it's similar in some regard to Sally and Hannah earlier this year as to when they were first getting better organized in terms of structure, that the western half of the system, or all those systems, was much more bare in convection. That's pretty similar to what we're seeing right now with Delta at this point in the Caribbean Sea. So they might be also expecting that that remains a bit longer, to the point where they don't really have to issue watches or warnings. But it wouldn't shock me either, based on the current trends, to see potential watches come up in the Yucatan in association with Delta at the next full advisory.
Which is coming up at the end of this hour, by the way, so stay tuned for all of that. We'll also be able to take your questions as time goes on. Here's me, by the way, hello. And you can see everything that's going on in the Atlantic in all of those panels. You can start your message with Force 13 all in text, and we'll be able to take some questions during this hour. We'll also bring to you the very latest from National Hurricane Center when they do update at the end of the hour. And regarding Recon just now, they're still within the storm and getting more data?
Yes.
They only just got into the storm and made their first pass. They've just about gotten to the southeast edge of the storm, and I presume they will be turning north to make a northeast to southwest pass.
Yes. And whilst we've just got a moment here, let's cut away to this. This is Tropical Storm Chan-Hom. Bit of a mess actually, but suggestions there that winds are around 45 miles per hour, low pressure of 991 millibars, quite low because the storm is quite large. But do watch out on this one, because it could become a Category 1 or 2 typhoon and could make landfall in Japan, either Kyushu or Shikoku or Honshu, near that intensity. So Problems on both sides of the world yet again, and early indications showing that the Western Pacific will really ramp up towards the end of October and early November.
Yeah. I mean, the Westpac's been extremely quiet this year, and so like usually the Westpac has more named storms than the Atlantic, and not the other way around. So.
Yes. Well, the Atlantic is really crazy at the moment. 26th tropical cyclone of the season is what you're looking at here, Delta. The average named storm count per year is around 12. We are how far ahead of Rio 2005 now? At least a month?
About a month and a half.
I
think we might be near 2 months, actually.
41 days ahead.
Yeah, so about a month and a half.
Days. And,
yeah.
you know, if you're in November and saying 41 days, then that wouldn't mean very much, but we're still in October and we've still got potentially 4 or 5 more storms to come this month.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we had a poll out on the community tab asking people how many storms they think would form in the entire month of October, and the largest singular answer was 2 to 3, and we're 5 days into the month now with 2 already, so, I mean, it really goes to show that expectations continue to be smacked apart with this season.
Yeah, and that could probably be thanks to the fact that this is 2020, and 2020 as a whole is just a mess of a year.
Now, a few people have been remarking on that tiny little swirl there in the central Atlantic, not far from Bermuda, saying it's Paulette. Well, I can confirm to you now that it is no longer Paulette, so don't worry. It's really, really a nothing. What happened is that yesterday, the remnant energy from Paulette died off and a new circulation formed to its south, so this is now treated as a new system entirely. National Hurricane Center, I think, in their point of view, made that conclusion several days ago, but by what we've seen, we made that distinction overnight. 10% on that thing, and that might be generous looking at it.
Something that I just want to point out with Delta is if it makes landfall in the U.S., which it's quite clear that it will, that will be the 10th landfalling tropical cyclone in the U.S. this year, and that would break the record set back in 1916, where that season had 9 in a single season.
That season also saw 2 landfalling July majors, which is a comparison to 2005.
We're just looking on screen here at Gamma. I don't know if anyone wants to offer their thoughts on that. Looking somewhat pitiful right now off the Yucatan.
Certainly a shadow of its former self. It was a borderline hurricane at landfall a couple of days ago, and Shear from the trough over the northern Gulf of Mexico has just ripped it apart and let dry air in, and it's not going to do anything now.
Yeah. I mean, if you just look at the satellite imagery, most of the deep convection not only is very displaced from the center, but you could even make an argument that it's more associated with the actual trough at this point.
Oh, yes.
Associated to the north and east of it than it actually is with Gamma itself. If that happens and persists itself for, you know, a significant time period, you know, then
as in another
after this moves
30
back
minutes,
inland,
it's going to be gone.
Well, they won't downgrade that quickly just because it still has, you know, precipitation rainfall associated with it banding
They're going to
around
downgrade
the
to a
center
tropical
circulation.
depression, we think.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the ATCF says. It's more likely than not that they will, based on the data that they're getting. And then once it moves inland into Mexico, it probably won't be too long again until it's no longer a tropical cyclone.
Looking back at the 1-minute imagery on Delta, there it is once again. We'll leave that up on the screen for a little while. Let's see if we've got any comments and questions. And the first one is just like what we've been getting in our Discord server all day long. Could this be like Wilma in terms of intensity?
The probabilities are quite low.
Now's the time to say what you guys think about the Wilma comparisons.
The comparison to Wilma with any storm is always a bad one to make, because Wilma has the record smallest eye for any tropical cyclone in the world, and it holds the record of the most rapid intensification in a 6-hour and 12-hour period. The likelihood of anything breaking that is astronomically small. However, it could get to Category 5 status, which, when you get that high, it doesn't matter how strong you are. If it makes landfall, it will cause complete destruction. So it doesn't matter if it's not as strong as Wilma. if it gets anywhere near Category 5, it's going to be devastating if it moves near land. And we're looking that it could move near Cuba or the Yucatan.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking right now at a situation where it's got about a day before it crosses, most likely between the Yucatan Peninsula and Cuba as a hurricane by almost complete consensus now. It's going to have completely favorable conditions to that point, so it wouldn't be surprising to see it jump a little bit ahead of expectations. And it's going to have about another day to 2 days in the Gulf of Mexico where conditions are also largely favorable. When it gets a bit closer to land in between days 4 and 5, an uptick in shear combined with some continental dry air entrailment and cooler sea surface temperatures in your shelf waters will likely contribute to some weakening. But until that point, it's generally quite favorable conditions. It wouldn't be surprising at all to see a major hurricane form out of this based on the recon data that we're getting right now, and I wouldn't be surprised to see an M on that cone at the next update.
It's got to happen. You know, they're saying 105 miles per hour. That was based on the storm's intensity being 45 miles an hour. So,
yeah, I mean, that's blown out of the
using
water
a
now.
simple extrapolation of just adding 15, because it's currently 60 plus, adding 15 to 105, 120, there's your Category 3.
You know, and for people asking, you know, in our Discord server and in the chat, you know, like Kay said, Wilm was not really, you know, a very good comparison just because, you know, the rarity of that and also different characteristic differences between the two systems as well, along with their expected paths right now.
What I will give it is that it is in pretty much an identical place. Like, within a 1 by 1 degree grid.
That's true, but its movement speed is expected to accelerate past Cuba and the Yucatan into the Gulf of Mexico, and then only slow down when it gets to the end of this ridge by Wednesday evening into early Thursday.
But then, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but moving slower than expected right now, Strat.
That's true, but there isn't any indication that it's just gonna, you know, slow down very substantially to the point of, you know, almost stalling out, but moving at enough of a pace that it isn't upwelling and killing itself that way.
Might make the point that the reason it's expected to accelerate is because it will be slingshotting around Gamma. And since the Gamma is rapidly becoming a remnant low,
True.
It might not be that much to slingshot around, and it might move slower than anticipated, which would give it potentially as much as an extra 6 hours in the Caribbean.
Very interesting
point. That's a lot of extra intensity potential.
And speaking about Gamma just now, there was a question there. Could an argument be made that Gamma is subtropical?
Probably not, because even though the cloud cover is displaced.
No,
yeah.
Its core is warm core, completely warm core, so therefore it's...
And the wind field isn't displaced out to that convection either, so you don't have a massive wind field. It's still relatively contained towards where the actual center of the system is. It's just that shear's ripping away all the deep convection sharply to the north and east of the center, with a little bit of moisture trying to come in on the southwestern side. But just looking at basic visible satellite imagery, clearly a weaker storm, but not subtropical by any means.
Could the colder sea temperatures on the coast weaken Delta? In the case of the Gulf Coast, absolutely, it would be baffling, micro level of bafflement, I would think, if it didn't weaken.
I have to stop you. We have the vortex data message from the first pig, and they're giving it 65 miles an hour, 984 millibars.
Okay.
Direct from recon.
So, I mean, I don't think they'll have a full second center fix before the next full advisory, so it wouldn't surprise me at all for that to be able to go with the update.
Where was the 65 miles per hour?
I'm
asking, really, have they sampled the northeast?
Inbound and outbound in the northwest and southeast.
Yeah, they haven't gone to the northeastern quadrant yet, nor the southwest.
Might well have 60 knots in the northeast.
Yeah.
If I'm reading this correctly, that 984 pressure reading actually has a little bit of 10 knot wind on it, so that's actually 983 millibars actually.
The reading, well, I haven't actually seen the drop sond itself. For some reason, the vortex has come out before the drop sond, so I'll be able to confirm that with you when they give us the drop sond.
All right.
Yeah, and I would just like to note.
Go ahead, Strat.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I just would like to note that, you know, if they go out and say this is 984, 983 millibars at the next update, it very likely means that it didn't actually deepen 5 millibars an hour about for 3 straight hours. It's more likely an indicator that the pressure estimate that they were using at the 2 p.m. update was higher than the actual center pressure of the storm at the time. So it means it was stronger then in terms of pressure than what they were saying, not necessarily that it's rapidly deepened 15 millibars within a 3-hour time frame.
And recon is now heading towards the northeast quadrant to make a northeast and southwest pass.
All right, we'll hear about that. Seeing a trend here, especially this year, this is a question in which the storms that rapidly intensified are weighted heavily eastward, not that much wind in the west side on early stages. Can Delta follow? First of all, your thought on that theory, and secondly on Delta's situation. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's that they had a more established eastern wind field.
Well, generally, you would see that because in the northern hemisphere, storms move northwards more than they move southwards, which means that the eastern side is in the forward quadrant. Therefore, it gains momentum from the storm itself moving through the ocean. So that would expand the wind field on that side naturally. So it's not unusual for that to be the case. But the more prominent trend this year has been storms rapidly intensifying just before landfall.
Yeah, unfortunately. Doesn't give us much time to prepare, that's for sure. Any impacts in Atlanta, Georgia from Delta? A little bit early to be asking about that area, although they are in, well, on the very edge of the cone nearly, I think. 5% chance of tropical storm conditions in 5 days.
It'd probably be more of a rain threat there.
Ask again on Wednesday, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah, I think a very important note to make still is that the average 4-day track error, and they say this in their forecast products as well, is about 160 miles or so. So looking at the cone right now, you shouldn't be saying, okay, you know, I'm on the far periphery of this. I need to, you know, not really pay as much attention to this. You know, cone shift anywhere within that cone can see the center within the next 4 days or so along the central Gulf Coast, and sometimes it even goes out of that as well. So, I mean, it's an important caution note that that doesn't really mean you're going to see a landfall exactly near that point in the eastern south coast of Louisiana, but it does mean that everyone along the central Gulf Coast needs to be watching this very closely and making sure that their plans are in place and ready to go as soon as necessary.
Well, the way Delta's going, looks like it'll already be out of that old cone.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly tracking west of the near-term expectations completely, although it is moving quite slowly right now, in part due to center relocation earlier today.
More questions. What was our peak for Gamma? I don't know if that's a hot topic amongst our team, but 70 miles an hour is what it was officially.
Yeah. I mean, they were doing recon at landfall on it, and that was showing pretty consistently 70 miles.
Was 2 hours. Unfortunately, the next plane was en route as it made landfall, and then it turned around without ever getting there. So we have a 2-hour gap before landfall. Quite probable that it sort of intensified further in that time. The structure didn't change. I presume the NHC might extrapolate and call it 75 in the post-analysis, but that is a matter for the post-analysis. We don't need to be discussing it now.
I'd be sticking to 70. What would we, this is from Sohum, who is on our team, what would you consider to be your analogue for Delta? Which is an interesting question the more you think about it. You can't say Wilma, because Wilma's track is much different. I saw someone earlier today mention Gustav. And I've also seen banded around Lily in 2002.
Lily is a regional analogue that peaked in the southern Gulf of Mexico in early October as a mid-range Category 4 hurricane. Luckily, Lily weakened rapidly before landfall and only made landfall as a Category 1 hurricane.
Yeah.
But we could see a similar thing from Delta, peaking in the northern Caribbean or the southern Gulf.
Probably a stronger landfall.
Weakening as it moves to probably a stronger landfall.
I think the hard part in finding a good analog, you know, Gustav and Lily, once they're in the Gulf of Mexico, pretty similar track expectations to what the latest forecast cone is saying, but they both formed significantly further to the east, and I'm pretty sure both of them actually moved either over or to the north of Jamaica, while this is forming significantly further to the west and is also moving south of Jamaica. So there are some conundrums within it. I can't really think of the best, real particularly strong analog, at least in formation location, right off the top of my head.
The issue is this is recurving significantly further north than is normal for an October hurricane. They normally turn to the northeast at a much further south point, so there aren't many good analogs for intensity and track. I mean, I can give you a huge list of rapidly intensifying October Caribbean hurricanes, but I don't think any of them, besides Lily, move towards the northwest.
This is more going to be more like an earlier in the season track.
Yeah, exactly.
More questions here. Gary says, what's the chance of Delta making landfall closer to Houston? Well, on the edge of the old cone there, which will be updated by National Hurricane Center in half an hour, Houston wasn't too far away from the edge of it, so I would keep watching closely. It may be on the very edge of the next cone, we'll see. Certainly not a 0% chance of storm force conditions. They even acknowledged at the 11 a.m. advisory that far back now that it was nearly 20% chance of tropical storm force conditions. So, and the GFS parallel also trending westwards in their last run. So yeah, could be something over there. At the moment though, we're still looking at Louisiana quite clearly. Again.
I do have a question. Coming in. Anyways, I have a question that has come in from Do It for Dale. Could gamma rapidly weakening be the cause of Delta's slower movement?
We sort of covered that. We're sort of musing that maybe it's the reason.
Well, it's harder to see it this far apart from the two, just because both of them are relatively smaller systems. Once it gets towards the Yucatan, then.
Earlier, and the main influence for Delta's movement was gamma. There isn't a significant high pressure system that's quite weak. There aren't any troughs near Delta. Gamma was the only thing that was going to be kicking it northward, and with gamma weakening unexpectedly quickly, its influence has shrunk and it's not able to turn Delta northward. So it may well move much closer to the Yucatan than we expected or would like.
So do you think we're going to see a significant change in the National Hurricane Center's thinking at the advisory?
Not necessarily at this advisory, but we may well see a significant change in the zero D models, and therefore at the
11 p.m.
advisory, we might then see a change in the track.
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind, at least in terms of gamma, is that even if it's much weaker now too, you know, models can still initialize it as a still substantial system with some of its influence, because it is broadening out now as it interacts with this trough. You know, if you look at the visible satellite imagery, it's got a pretty wide ring of cloud cover around where its clear center of circulation is. So even though it's going to be weaker and move inland and probably dissipate before day 3 now, in all likelihood, it could still have enough of a steering impact to kick this thing off to the north and away from a landfall in the Yucatan. For now, though, it definitely wouldn't be surprising to see some shifts, just because gamma really has deteriorated quite significantly.
It looks awful.
Yeah, it really has. It doesn't look like it'll be around much longer.
Nicholas is very eagerly asking, when will Epsilon come? Well, steady on there. Steady on there. No. We haven't got past Gamma and Delta yet.
Yeah.
We're going to be struggling enough with that. But seriously, you know, we could get Epsilon plus more in the next 10 days. How big could Delta get is another question. Not that big.
They mean like in size?
Yeah, I think.
Well, I don't think it'll be as big as Tip.
That's a fairly safe bet to make.
That's a very safe bet to make.
Looking at what it might do in the Gulf, as it enters the Gulf after peaking, if it gets strong, it might well undergo an eye-wall replacement cycle, and that's a process which works to expand the wind field, and therefore it might be significantly weaker at peak in wind speed, but the pressure may still be quite low, and it may have a large wind field, like several notable hurricanes have done that, such as Ike. or good stuff.
Yeah, it wouldn't be particularly shocking to see, tropical storm wind radius of, 150 to 200 miles in all four quadrants when this thing gets at its peak, and then try to broaden out a bit more towards landfall. But based on its location and current size, you're not going to see a system that's going to have 300 to 400 mile an hour tropical storm force winds in all four quadrants. You're not really going to see something try to get up towards say Teddy size, for example, if you want an Atlantic comparison for this year.
Yeah, 300 to 400 miles wide, indeed. And Andrew asked, what is the current CDPS on Delta? And what do you think would be a reasonable peak intensity, both in winds and in pressure? Well, our update earlier on today, which was about, how long ago was that now? It was about, let's see.
4.5?
Nearly, yeah, 4.5 hours ago.
4, 5.
That had a CDPS stage 4. It had just entered stage 4. With the storm intensifying, looks like it's going to be stronger than what we had down even at that update, so probably getting to mid to high stage 4 in that 10 tier scale. Extensive damage likely. We'll keep you posted on that. And regarding its peak intensity, well, that is changing as well. At the moment, personally, I would forecast something like 120 miles an hour. There's a few factors in play as to its peak intensity in the Gulf, because it's the Yucatan Channel's not a very big gap, and if it moves much west at all, then the Yucatan Peninsula might deliver a blow to its intensification phase.
Yeah, and the European and GFS 12Z runs are indicating even more westward track than the 15Z National Hurricane Center cone for Delta. Both of them bring it very close, or I think the GFS's case actually clipping the northeastern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula near Cancun. So it's definitely something to watch out for. If that happens, then you might not see the system try to reach its zenith or peak in the southern Gulf of Mexico if it's trying to have more significant land interaction beforehand.
More questions here, and I'll run through them a little bit. Is it possible for Delta to stall and hit Texas? Well, I know everyone is wary about storms stalling over Texas, but not really at this time of year. I think the threat, well, sort of verified already, but it has passed now. It won't stall. Do we think the hurricane names will go past Zeta this year? Yes. For the cone, how much of a mile difference would the track be? I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think they're asking how much of shift to maybe expect right now for initialization. I still think an important thing to note is, if you're talking about the U.S., the forward error is about 160 miles. So focusing on, every minute shift right now, especially if you're living in that area at all, isn't probably the best thing to do. It's better to just make sure that you're starting preparations as early as possible if you're in the potential impact zone, and making sure that you have your general plan in place while monitoring the latest developments. By the time we get to tomorrow evening, and especially by the time we get to Wednesday morning as the storm enters the Gulf of Mexico, specific impacts will be becoming much more clear than they are right now.
Did you get the drop zone information, Kay?
I did. I posted it and pinged you with it. If you want to put it up on screen, it shows an interesting.
Not able to do that just now, but what does it tell us?
It has a clear V shape, which indicates the eye is drying, and is a hallmark of intensification.
We have the 5 p.m. advisory for Gamma. It's now a tropical depression.
There we go.
Oh, there we go.
As expected. I'm anticipating them to say that it's probably going to become a remnant low within the next 36 hours.
We've got that V-shaped drop zone that you mentioned there, Kay. Do you want to talk about it again?
So you can see that there is not high rain or anything, because there's a gap between the lines, and generally the bigger the gap, the drier the air, and in the eye you'd have the driest air of the hurricane. And the V shape at the top is indicative of strengthening, and often significant strengthening.
Interesting. Regarding Gamma just there, they expect it to be post-tropical in 6 hours, 12 hours, maybe 6 hours, who knows, shortly. And all warnings are gone. Yeah.
I'd say it'll be post-tropical at 11 o'clock. Because they say in their advisory, likely to become post-tropical remnant low tonight.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Some recon update. The flight that was due to go into Gamma has been rescheduled to Delta since Gamma is expected to dissipate.
Good.
And that will be filling in the gap between the two recons. So as this one's leaving, the next one should be taking off.
Oh, cool. That's good news.
Yay.
I think we got a question in the chat as well for areas that were getting more impacted by Sally. I think someone was asking more particularly for Pensacola if they'll get impacted per se. You know, I think the same message that goes in earlier, I know there's a lot of people flowing in and out, so it makes sense to reiterate, is that it's too early to zero down what kind of impacts will occur in any specific area along the central Gulf Coast, particularly because the track error can be, 160 miles for the 4-day point. So it is important if you're really from Pensacola or on the Florida Panhandle all the way towards, even Houston right now, just be watching it closely, because by a day and a half from now, the track will be much more clear. And then at that point, you can zero in on, what my area or your area is going to have for potential impacts much more clearly. In general, right now, though, making sure your plan's up to date and you have proper supplies just in case impacts become more likely is the best step that you can take.
Let's look elsewhere just now at the eastern Pacific Ocean, and you can see here as the image loads, well, hopefully. Well, it was supposed to. Oh, there it is. Marie, tropical storm there, moving out to sea and dying off. I think we might have a tropical depression or storm on our hands very shortly. On the very right-hand side of that image, an area of interest, which was 90% from National Hurricane Center this morning. I'd be surprised if they don't name that soon, because it's looking very good. Just thought I'd mention that one.
What are the odds of development that they were giving it for the next 5 days at 2 p.m.? I think they were giving at least 80, right?
90%.
But we're saying 90%.
Yeah.
So if they don't name it or designate a tropical depression at this advisory, it wouldn't be shocking to see them do it in 6 hours from now.
Yeah.
They hinted.
The thing on the very right-hand side of the image there. Sorry, go ahead.
They hinted at it that it would likely form into a tropical depression either this afternoon or tonight. So I'd say easily, if not by 5 o'clock, I think we will have a tropical depression or storm in the eastern Pacific by 11 o'clock tonight.
Alright, just lost that briefly. Let's go back to the 1-minute rapid scan imagery on Delta, which is there, and you can again see that depression towards the center of the storm. Is that the eye itself there, or is it just a bit of an illusion? What do we think?
In Delta?
Yes.
No, it's just a small gap in the convection.
Yeah.
Not an eye.
Weren't they saying pinhole? Eye?
The eye is 18 nautical miles across, according to the first message.
Yeah, so I mean, that wouldn't really fit the designation of pinhole.
Pinhole yet.
That's not pinhole. Okay. Right.
Let's see if we can get some more questions. I know it's chat flow is going quite quickly. We'll no doubt going to miss some. Could Delta produce more ACE than Laura?
I would be surprised, just because it doesn't have as much time as a named storm for one. Laura was a tropical storm for, I think, about 4 days before it entered the Gulf of Mexico, and right now its peak's expected to be lower.
Well,
It is expected to be a hurricane for probably 12 to 24 hours longer, at least right now, though, so it does have that in its favor.
could Delta be another Ike?
I don't expect it to hit Houston, but it could make landfall with a similar wind to pressure ratio.
Okay. What else have we got? What storm do you think we will end at? Well, That's a speculative question. It's quite clear we're going to beat 2005's Zeta, because that's only 2 storms away.
Well, two names, 3 storms, because the unnamed one is 2005.
Fair, yep. And general questions there. Not sure what else we have just now. More of the same, I think. Could Delta be a Category 1 in the next update? Well, we're about to find out. It doesn't look like it.
I don't think Recon's going to quite get there in time, but what Recon has done is they have gained altitude. They were at 850, and after their first pass, they decided it's not a tropical storm, or close to a moderate tropical storm. They've gone to 700 millibars, which is the flight level for a hurricane.
What else do we have here? I'm just seeing all the same things going by. Do we think it will be a hurricane today? Well, that's essentially asking whether it will be now or at the 11 p.m. advisory. You think so?
I think at 11 p.m. it's quite late.
It is quite. I'm going to guess it's likely.
Based on the intensification trends, it would not be surprising to see this system at hurricane strength at 11 p.m. That gives it another 6 hours to gain 5 to 10 miles an hour, depending on what the northeastern quadrant is right now when we get that data.
Something that's been brought to my attention is that the wind pressure ratio is very off given the size of the storm, and that there's likely a bit of wind lag going on where the winds lag behind the pressure and then catch up. So we may well see the winds begin to increase to similar level to the pressure. So maybe we'll be sub 980 and a minimal hurricane at 11 p.m. Something like that.
Gosh.
Wow.
That doesn't happen all too often in the Atlantic for a sub 980 to be only a minimal hurricane.
Didn't it happen earlier this year with the Storm 2? I'm forgetting which one. There was...
Hannah was 973 under high-end category 1. But that was big. This is very small.
Yeah. So,
it's going to be at 980 while still a tropical storm, which is actually what Gamma did. Wasn't that 980 and 70 miles an hour?
Just about, yeah.
The update on Marie is out for anyone who might care. 45 miles per hour, a pressure of 1001 millibars. They expect that it will turn post-tropical within 12 hours.
So just that rapid weakening continuing with that system for now, fortunately. Out to sea, no impact to land, gonna wind down.
Strat's desperately finding things to say about Marie there.
Well, do we want to go over the current watches and warnings in place for them? I know there's for Delta at least. There's going to be some changes that happen.
Well,
of course.
It's about to change, so we'll just wait on that. But just for those who haven't heard just yet, Gamma watches and warnings have all been discontinued. It could be the case that they get straight back into effect for Delta. I don't know, considering it's going further west than forecast.
Yeah, I mean, based on the 12Z model guidance from a plethora of computer models, it wouldn't surprise me at all because, you know, like we said a little bit earlier, European and GFS are closer to the Yucatan, much closer. The GFS in particular tries to have it actually clip the northeastern tip as a landfall barely near Cancun in about 42 to 48 hours from 8 a.m. today, Eastern time. So that would be probably Wednesday morning-ish. The German model is initializing right now for its 18Z run, at least the graphical version. But the 12Z also was trying to indicate a closer move as well. So, I mean, it's going to be pretty close. The difference, though, with the German model, at least for 12Z, is that it kept Gamma alive and moved it around the Yucatan Peninsula as a tropical storm, and that clearly isn't going to happen anymore. So that run itself is probably going to have to be thrown out.
The advisory is out on Tropical Storm Marie.
Yeah, we mentioned that one, Ethan.
Yep.
Sorry to break that one before you there. I know Ethan is a very wild Eastern Pacific fan.
I wouldn't say that.
Really?
We'll have
All
to
right.
see if they also run with 19E as well. I know that that Invest 95E is
Mhm.
pretty close to becoming a tropical depression, if not already.
I'm a little surprised they haven't given it a designation.
But a question just to answer the chat really quick. Someone's saying, what is Z, like, for example, 12Z? That's reference to Zulu time, which is universal time, I think?
It's the same as UTC.
Yeah, it's
I
the same as
believe it's
UTC.
named after an African tribe that's in the same time
Yeah,
zone.
Zulu tribe, yeah. So for reference, that is currently 4 hours ahead of the time on the East Coast. So if someone says 12Z, they're referencing 12 p.m. Zulu time or UTC time. That'd be 8 a.m. on the East Coast. If they're saying 18Z, that'd be 2 p.m. on the East Coast. Just for reference there.
It's what they use in the military.
Also, something interesting to note with Delta itself and its current movement is that it is bringing rainfall and impacts to Jamaica. And I think this is probably the fourth storm within the past about month to month and a half that's brought significant rainfall to Jamaica without actually having any warnings in place for there. So they've been getting impacts from storms left and right through the peak of the season, but have really been avoiding any direct impacts to date, at least.
Yeah, we're in a bit of a lull right now because we're waiting for the advisory on Delta, which will probably not come until just before the due time. Those of you who are very familiar with the National Hurricane Centre's operations will notice that quite often the advisories come out sometimes up to half an hour earlier than their expected time, but especially when recon are around the storm, they usually put that a lot closer to the wire. What are they doing now, by the way?
We're not entirely sure. They've been gaining altitude and going in circles, and sending some mixed messages.
Mixed
through
messages?
Their, well, one website says that the mission is finished, but we saw this happen in Teddy, and then it just jumped a bit and then continued.
Right.
Was that when Teddy's recon plane teleported?
Yeah.
That one time.
Might be. We know that they've gained a lot of altitude, but they appear to be descending again. They're just going in circles while they likely work out what they're doing at the new flight level, because it would change their plan of attack, so to speak.
I mean, either that or they have to just keep circling because, you know, they gotta check something out on the plane or whatever.
That's another potentiality.
Yeah.
So who knows where we are with that. I'm sure the National Hurricane Centre are filled in on what's going on over there. Let's see if we've got some more questions then. Questions about what might have been season will look like this year. Wait and see. I don't think you'll be disappointed.
Absolutely absurd is your answer.
You don't even know.
I got a couple ideas.
When will we be doing more live coverage? Will we be doing a tropical weather bulletin tonight? Not sure of our schedule just yet. I think we will finish when we get the information out from this next advisory, and then probably get on to at least another storm update later tonight.
Yeah, I think the conundrum for the National Hurricane Center right now, though, is that because this recon flight has been kind of circling around here outside the tropical storm force winds on the eastern half, they're definitely not getting a pass through the northeastern quadrant or any center picks again before the next update. So it probably means that they're going to have to go with 65 miles an hour because of that, and then or 70 if they decide that there's enough reason to believe the northeastern side is a little bit stronger than the southeastern or northwestern quadrants. But then if the recon flight continues its regular schedule, passes through and finds something stronger on that part, then they're going to have to, you know, circle around and go back either in the intermediate advisory or give a special update about the system. So definitely not the best for their workload right now to have the recon plane circling around.
The newest model runs will be out in about an hour, but in the meantime, let's take a look at what the last ones said. This is from Kay, who sent us in these charts, focusing on the HWRF, but looking at some of the others as well there. HWRF only calling for high-end Category 1 there in those earlier model runs.
Yes, it's been doing a bit strange with its runs without recon. It had some resolution. Sometimes it would produce a sub 950, 125 mile an hour.
Oh, wow.
And the next run, it wouldn't even get to Cat 2. So
it does that.
It will start being a bit more consistent once the reconnaissance data comes in.
Yeah, HWRF doesn't have that much consistency during those times.
Looking at these runs, you can see the black line is between the 11 a.m. advisory and the 2 p.m. advisory. And you can see in wind speed, it's tied with the strongest models. With pressure, we now know it's close to 980, and that's 10 millibars deeper than any model.
Oh, wow.
And the location has actually moved slightly south of the west.
That's the first one that I noticed there.
And it's going to be continuing to move in that sort of direction, fairly close to west. So that would move the guidance close to or over the Yucatan Peninsula as a much stronger system than they're showing.
Yeah. I mean, based on some of the model guidance, I think that shows the GFS there as well, really clipping that very northwestern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. If you see another guidance shift, a bit further to the south, it wouldn't be surprising to see, a stronger system. You could make an easy argument for Category 2 based on the intensification trends, trying to get towards a Cancun area landfall in about a day and a half from now. So people there, we've been talking a lot about the United States, of course, but people in the Yucatan Peninsula, if trends like this continue, need to be watching this very closely and making sure that they're keeping the preparations up.
Ethan.
Breaking news, we have Tropical Depression 19E.
Oh, we do.
45 miles per hour peak, actually 50 miles per hour peak. Slow intensification is forecast up to 50 miles per hour at day 4 and day 5.
So that's a new tropical depression in the eastern Pacific Ocean, out at sea, from quite far away from the western coast of Mexico. Not sure exactly how far. Position 12.8 north, 105.4 degrees west.
Recon has finished making circles, and they are continuing the mission. They have moved to 700 millibar height.
Okay, this is interesting. Then we'll probably stay on for a little longer then to find out exactly what they get. In the meantime, we're waiting for the National Hurricane Center's update on Delta, and then I'll have to scramble and update the bottom bars, but I'm sure people can tolerate that for a few minutes whilst you guys keep going with the conversation. Just trying to get some more imagery up on Delta right now. This is, as I said earlier, the 26th tropical cyclone of the Atlantic hurricane season. So it's getting quite difficult to reference particular cyclones without confusing one for another anymore.
Are we at 26 tropical cyclones or 26 named storms at this point?
It's not 26 named storms.
Alright, so we're at 25 named storms then.
It's
that long of a year that it's hard to even remember that properly.
Yep.
The altitude that Recon has gone to in Delta suggests that they are going into a hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. I will say, despite the sheer amount of named storms, it's almost been a
The
miracle.
advisory has come out. We have a hurricane warning to the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, including
There you
Cancun
go.
and Cozumel.
Wow, from
Confident,
nothing to a hurricane warning. 70-mile-an-hour winds. They're expecting a peak of a Category 3. 3 major hurricane dots will appear on the map, and landfall as a Category 2 by the looks of things still. Peak intensity 120 miles per hour.
That 50 mile and up for the peak intensity is exactly what you said earlier in the stream, Nathan.
Is this 19E or something
What was
else?
that?
That you saying, up at about 15 miles to
Well,
120 was exactly what you said earlier in the stream.
well, that was based on the 60 mile per hour, though. If you're extrapolating all the way, then you'd up it another 10. But no,
Oh God.
no. So just to reiterate, the government of Mexico has issued a hurricane warning for the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula from Tulum northward and westward to Rio Lagatos, including Cozumel.
And obviously the city of Cancun.
Including Cancun.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you look at the, I haven't seen the newest cone yet. I think we're just going to wait for that graphic to come out. But based on earlier computer models in the westward shift, it wouldn't be surprised to see a landfall near Cancun, which is a very populated area. So
Not
people
good.
there do need to be starting their preparations now with that hurricane warning in place.
The advisory says that the centre of Delta is now expected to pass southwest of the Cayman Islands
Yeah.
early Tuesday and approach the northeastern portion of the Yucatan Peninsula Tuesday afternoon or evening.
Yeah. And they also went with 70 miles an hour instead of just 65, so they are going a bit above what they were finding in the northwestern and southeastern quadrants of the storm.
Pressure 983, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Data from the Hurricane Hunter aircraft indicates the maximum sustained winds have rapidly increased to near 70, and additional rapid strengthening is expected during the next day or so, and it is expected to be a major hurricane as it nears the Yucatan Peninsula.
Yep.
So, I mean, just for reference, this wasn't even a named storm 9 hours ago, or it was just becoming one 9 hours ago. 12 hours ago, still a tropical depression. So you're talking about a very quick ramp up ongoing right now. It's important to note, and that they're expecting that trend to continue. And my question is, I'm waiting for the cone to come out too, but do either of those position points that you're seeing on the forecast advisor indicate a potential landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula near Cancun yet on the newest update, or are they saying just offshore?
They're saying it's going to approach the channel and the peninsula. So they're not making it clear from their text. So it could make landfall.
Yeah, we might have to wait a little bit to get the clearest picture, but I mean, clearly a startling trend for the Yucatan Peninsula, particularly the northeastern part, which has already seen significant rainfall from Gamma as well.
It's suggesting that the center of the storm will pass around 25 miles north of Cancun.
Yeah, so it's going to be a really close call then, because any deviation further south would likely bring the actual center on shore to parts of the northeastern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula.
Basically, the further west it goes in the short term, the closer it will be to the city of Cancun, and we could be looking at a major hurricane making landfall in the city.
Yeah, it's possible.
So, I mean, that's 0 to 100 really quick in terms of what you're talking about with warnings. So, I mean, if anyone here's in the northeastern Yucatan Peninsula watching this, you know, start your preparations now. Stay up to date with your local officials for the information they're giving out about the storm. But, you know, again, have your plan in place and start acting on it now. Make sure you're staying up to date. You know, if you have in a prone area, if you're under any risk for evacuation orders, make sure you're staying up to date on those as well.
Oh, the advisory's out apparently.
Yep. Yeah, we've been talking about it a little bit.
We have the cone, if you want to bring it up, Nathan.
I'll see if we can get it here. That's the new cone. There it is.
Oh.
Okay.
That cone would bring the western eye wall onshore.
Yep.
Yeah.
It seems the threat in Cuba is diminishing rapidly.
Well, that's what I thought at the start of this hour when it was continuing to move west. Wind field increased a little bit as well.
Moving due west at 8 miles an hour.
Due west still.
I mean, that's what the data shows. It's, you know, we were expecting a bit more of a latitude gain already, but I mean, clearly bad news for areas that have just been impacted by Gamma.
And they're expecting it to continue to move slowly for the next 12 hours. So it's got 36 hours over the West Caribbean before it approaches land, and if it keeps going slowly westward, it would not only make it a direct landfall in the Yucatan, it would have even more time to strengthen. And that's the last thing we want to give it this time, when it's likely to be back intensifying.
National Hurricane Center do forecast the Yucatan Peninsula landfall, by the way.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's...
They do forecast the Yucatan Peninsula landfall. It's just barely on shore. But that's still one nonetheless.
Yeah. And, you know, further out right now, at least for people looking at it in the United States as well, they're still forecasting that at 96 hours. So when it's getting pretty close to shore, that it's still going to have winds of 100 miles an hour. But you're still looking at a significant storm approaching the United States, as well as a now clearly much more significant risk for a potential major hurricane for the Yucatan Peninsula.
And it would be prudent to note that the NHC has said there is increased uncertainty regarding potential landfall and timing in the Gulf Coast because guidance has increased in spread.
Yes, indeed. Also, just reading a note from the National Hurricane Center here. Where did it go just now? The initial motion estimate remains an uncertain 275 degrees, which is pretty much west, at 7 knots. They're not sure about it. The centre jogged southward this afternoon, according to them, which appears to be primarily due to the system organising rather than a true storm motion.
The NHC explicitly expecting and wanting rapid intensification. And what exactly are they showing? So the next 24 hours, they're showing a 35 knot increase in wind speed. We all know with these small compact systems that it could be a lot more than even that.
So, becoming another potent threat of this very long season so far.
Unfortunately, we could be looking at our second major hurricane landfall, potentially our second Category 4 landfall.
No, no.
And this is, I mean, Recon, they are going back in. So,
They are.
this is before we get more information. We're going to stay on a little longer to see if we can get some of that info. How long do you think it will take?
Half an hour, maybe? I'm not
It
sure.
should be approaching the centre by the bottom of the hour.
Alright.
Alright.
Reading through.
Okay, let's just off anyone.
We'll see if we can take some questions in the meantime. How do the sea
Sure,
surface
thank you.
temperatures this year in the Atlantic compare to 2005 and 2017?
They're similar, not quite on the same level across the basin. However, they have been higher in the Caribbean and Southern Gulf because we've seen less early season activity than 2005 did,
Yeah.
which is obviously meaning the late season is potentially more potent. But with regards to historical...
More potent than Wilma and Beta?
In terms of the potential energy available for multiple storms, there is more in October this year than there was in 2005. But
Yep.
unfortunately, the last hurricane to significantly impact this coastline was Wilma.
Gosh.
It's been 15 years since this happened, and we're likely seeing a second major hurricane hitting the same area.
Well, we'll just let that one sink in for a moment. Will we see a major hurricane making landfall in the US with Delta? Still, no is more likely than not.
It might have a significant storm surge associated with it in the same manner that, like, a little bit like Sandy, not quite to that extreme extent. Storms that have lower winds but higher surge.
Just see if we can get some sea surface temperatures now. It's been requested a few times. These are the, I assume, the latest sea surface temperatures. A little bit chopped off actually. I can only show you this angle. But you can still see there the Caribbean Sea is the warmest part of the Atlantic right now. Temperatures there, I can tell you, around 30 degrees Celsius, a little bit higher than that. Ahead of the storm.
They said 29 to 30.
And that might be a little bit conservative. I'd say 30 to 31. And then when you
They also note that the shear is 5 knots or less.
5 knots or less, and then you enter the Gulf of Mexico, 28 degrees, still extends almost to the US coast in the west of the Gulf.
Which is where the guidance is shifting towards.
Which is where it's
Actually
shifting.
The same place that Laura hit.
So, you know, if it shifts that way, a western approach is what we haven't had this year so far. West to northeast from the Gulf. So that's another area that's mostly untapped. I can only think of Hannah that even touched it.
Well, there was Laura that went over there.
Not all the way over though. And
Oh, no,
Beta,
not
of
towards
course.
the Texas coast. Yeah, but if
It
this
could
were to
head up
make a
that way.
significant shift, yeah, if the models track away from recurvature for some reason, it would keep, and you project the westward movement, it would impact Texas. Although that's unlikely at this time. It is likely to recurve, and unfortunately, you move that cone 100 miles west, and that's almost exactly the same area that Laura hit.
Here's the sea surface temperature anomalies. So this is how the temperatures are compared to average at this time of year. Most of the Atlantic above average, a few cool areas there in blue, that's due to recent hurricanes, but the Caribbean there around 2 degrees above, Western Pacific 2 degrees above, South China Sea 2 to 3, Eastern Pacific not particularly above average, especially the equatorial region, quite clear the La Nina there, but I mean the main development region above average as well. Some long-range models suggesting that the MDR might not shut down until around the 28th of October. We'll see.
And we can't rule out activity all the way in November. Not necessarily from the main development region.
No, that would be crazy. A question about how is the area of interest doing in the South Indian Ocean, would you believe? I'm not sure if I've got imagery of that right now. No, I don't. But I can tell you it will be. It's still very much in its formative stages. A 30% chance of development that we've given it could become a weak tropical storm that moves pretty much westwards towards Madagascar, and I forget the name of the chain of islands to its west, but the Comoros is one of those there, and then towards the African continent. Let's go back to the latest news, and that's that the National Hurricane Center have gone with 70 miles per hour for Tropical Storm Delta, and is expected to rapidly intensify in the next 24 hours and become a major hurricane on approach to Cancun on Wednesday. It will then continue into the Gulf of Mexico and still remain a hurricane, they think, until landfall, which could be in Louisiana, but they're not fully sure of the intensity, the location, or the timing, because there's quite a bit of uncertainty that far away. So you'll have to keep watching this space, because it is a rapidly changing situation. Is it more possible?
Another thing that Delta will be doing is it will be breaking the West Caribbean major hurricane drought. In the last few years or so, we haven't really seen a major in the area. The last one was 2011 with Rena, and that thankfully weakened to a tropical storm before landfall. But this will be the first major hurricane in 9 years in this area.
Makes you wonder, is it more possible that we'll see a peak of Category 4, then weaken, or more possible for it to be a major hurricane at landfall? Well, it depends which landfall you're talking about. The Mexican landfall, potential landfall of course, it may not happen, has the highest chance of being at peak intensity. The Gulf landfall, 95% chance that it will not be at peak intensity, but it could still be a significant hurricane with a big storm surge, which will be the biggest risk yet again. Let's see if we have anything else at this point. Don't think so. Any news from Recon?
We'll be getting an update shortly, but
Doesn't look like it.
They are heading southwest towards the centre.
They are? Okay. So we'll still wait up for more information on that. We'll probably finish up just after the half past the hour, and then there'll be more updates on our social platforms and on YouTube, with regular video updates later tonight and tomorrow as this storm continues to develop, and probably more live coverage tomorrow evening as well. But at the moment we're just waiting a little bit longer on that one. And a reminder...
Unfortunately, the models haven't come out yet.
Yes, models will be out later on this hour. As a matter of fact, some of them do come out a little bit earlier. Okay, the icon model usually comes out first. And I can see from the icon model right now the 18Z run coming out. This is hot off the press. It's currently up to hour 57, and it is forecasting... I don't know yet, because it isn't loading.
Technology.
Our wonderful technology. It's not my fault, though, this time.
Sure.
But we will get model information soon, and as it comes out. GFS is obviously one to watch. That's later in the hour, towards the end of the hour. If we're still here, I'm not sure we will be. And then following that, you have a few of the others too. Icon model has it at 990 millibars northwest of the Yucatan on day 2.5. They don't forecast much strengthening at all.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We should note that the models won't have reconnaissance data until
Yeah.
the next batch. This batch, unfortunately, will be the last one without recon data. So unfortunately, we're still going to be waiting 7 hours,
Yeah.
8 hours to get the first reliable data with the updated intensity.
And just for perspective, the Icon is initializing the storm at about 1,000 millibars, so...
And we know it was 20 lower.
1,000 when it's 983 at least, so... take that one with a pinch of salt. Although it does have,
24 hours
actually,
ago.
I've got to say, it's got gamma persisting for a little bit longer.
So, 24 hours ago is when Delta was designated as a potential tropical cyclone and had 30 knot winds at that time. So this means we've already seen a 30 knot increase in 24 hours.
From pretty much a standing start, that's quite impressive.
So yeah, rapid intensification from a standing start doesn't bode well for what may happen because tropical cyclones tend to increase in their rate of intensification as they get to hurricane status.
Sometimes they just rattle through the categories. But
In the most extreme cases, this could be approaching category 5 in 36 hours. Maria did that, for example.
certainly can't rule that out.
Not what we'd be looking to happen. No one wants that.
Especially with the weaker wind shear at this point.
Mm.
I'm not sure why this loop is loading so slowly, but I guess we'll have to give up on that. We're back to the 1 minute imagery and we've still got some daylight. So Kay, has your position changed at all on whether we're seeing an eye there or not?
I do not believe we're seeing an eye because, well, hold on. We might be starting to see the convection wrap around the centre, but there isn't an eye on visible satellite yet, but we might start to see proper rotation, if you get what I mean. You might see visible rotation around the centre, but not necessarily an eye.
Well, you are seeing physical rotation here. I mean, it's only like a half-hour loop or whatever, but
Centre, with the most intense convection previously, it was just blowing up and being big bursts covered everything. But in the latest frames, it looks like it's starting to drag that deepest convection around the centre in a cyclonic motion,
yes.
rather than just bursting up and blowing away.
Alright, so we're still waiting for more information from the recon plane, because I think that's going to be quite important.
I think it will be about
Oh.
a little bit later than we were expecting.
Okay.
It's gone a bit slower than I was anticipating, but hopefully we'll have the full pass by 42 the next hour.
1:45, okay. But it is headed there right now. They've started their movement towards the southwest. That happened a good 10 minutes ago, right?
Yes.
Unfortunately, you can't see the plane on the satellite imagery. It's too small.
If only that was possible.
It's there somewhere.
Well, you can see the planes underneath the clouds, so you wouldn't see it anyway.
True
No.
indeed. True indeed. Although, it would be cool if you could see it when it was in the eye, but nevertheless,
I'm sure the government with their super satellites can, but I don't know why they'd make a picture of a recon sighting for the public to look at.
how
I mean,
small? Here's a question: how small has an eye got to be considered a pinhole eye?
Generally, I believe it's 10 statute miles is considered the borderline pinhole, and if it's a bit smaller than that, say 8 miles, that's definitely a pinhole eye.
Do we know the size of this one?
It's around 20 miles.
20.
I believe it's at the last pass it was around 20. But another thing to note is that this would be broader than the final structure because it's only a tropical storm as far as we're aware, and as it intensifies, the decreasing pressure would cause the core to contract, so the eye will get smaller from this point, at least in the short term.
Very remarkable. The intensification is certainly continuing. Is there anything that could suggest that the intensification will halt at some point?
The only thing that will be stopping this intensification is an eye wall replacement cycle or landfall in the Yucatan.
Well, you heard it here first.
Yeah.
Ethan, any thoughts over there?
Nothing much from me, but this is certainly a developing situation. Given the storm's satellite appearance, they may honestly find that it's a hurricane when they pass through the northeastern island.
Well, I've seen hurricanes look worse.
If that were to happen, they would issue an update statement
Yeah.
probably at the top of the hour to increase the intensity and make it a hurricane. But we can get a good grasp of the rate intensification by seeing the pressure difference between the last pass and this pass, because they should be happening around an hour apart. So the difference in pressure would be the rate of intensification over the last hour.
Though, given its appearance, it wouldn't surprise me if it's a hurricane.
More questions here. Is it possible this could have major storm surge like Katrina? I love how people jump to some of the worst examples straight away.
Katrina has record-breaking storm surge for the United States. So it's not an example that we can make comparisons to with this storm because it's not going to be coming down from a immediate Category 5 peak that makes landfall in the US at least.
Would you compare the? I know it's very early, but would you compare the potential storm surge effects to something like Laura?
I think Laura's too high.
Too high.
To be honest, we might see. I think 10 foot would be an early uncertain estimate.
Very uncertain estimate because we don't know what this thing's
very
doing.
Uncertain. No, but that's assuming a Category 2 landfall with a reasonably big wind field. It could be less than that if it weakens rapidly. It could be more than that if it becomes bigger or holds intensity. That's sort of a mid-range, but you could honestly say 5 to 15.
The main mood of the chat right now are people asking almost incessantly at this point whether it's going to become a Category 5 hurricane.
We don't know.
Well, it's not a Category 1 yet, so let's start there. And that might be about to happen in the next hour or two, depending on what recon find. Currently forecasting a Category 3 peak. As a matter of fact, I can tell you one thing. From what I've seen, and I've got the master list of pretty much every model out there, not a single one has called for Category 5 so far. That may change.
If it were to get to Category 5 status, it would do so in 36 hours. Given that it was a tropical depression 18 hours ago, that would equal Wilma's time from depression to Category 5, and that's the current record holder of the Atlantic. So if it were to become a Category 5, it would tie the record for quickest time to get to that stage. So it's unlikely, given that's only ever happened once, and the storm that did that was Wilma.
Another question, do we see this storm blowing up and becoming a Category 2 just after midnight?
Just after the next full advisory. Certainly possible, but I wouldn't...
The more I think about that, the more I actually agree it is possible.
Yeah. Oh.
Could there be less shear than expected for the storm to strengthen in the Gulf?
The storm might be able to strengthen a bit in the southern Gulf, but once it gets further north, the heat content in the ocean will be dropping, the sea surface temperatures will be declining, dry air will be increasing, and the shear will be increasing. No matter how low it is, it will be starting to rise.
Honestly, Kay, though,
So,
if the storm takes the western edge of that cone, sea surface temperatures are still 27 at landfall.
yeah. Another thing that I saw is that they're expecting there to be increased divergence in the atmosphere associated with the trough. There's going to be a jet that will potentially reduce the impact of the shear on the storm by making it easier for it to sustain convection. So even if there is high shear, it may weaken more slowly than you'd expect due to extratropical environmental factors influencing it.
And just a question for me here is generally, we've seen storms this year that have had a lot of staying power. Is that a trend that's representative of the whole season, or is every storm going to be different in that regard?
There's been an unusually high number of storms surviving in shear when they honestly shouldn't be able to, and might be in part due to the unusually favourable conditions this season. We have seen 25 named storms before the first week of October is out, and that obviously never happened before. And given the favourable background space, it might be possible that that will influence storms' resistance to shear, but I would not expect it to continue into next year.
It better not.
Yeah.
Any more news from the recon plane right now? They must be getting closer.
I'm not seeing any.
So we'll see.
Yeah, they should be in the northeastern eye wall pretty much right now, I'd imagine.
They are just entering the 50-knot flight level wind. So the next update in 8 minutes from now will have the northeast eye wall.
Alright.
Alright, we'll be there for that. We'll definitely be there for that.
I don't think it'll quite get to the centre though, so we might have to wait another 10 minutes for the pressure estimates.
Yeah.
Just catching up with what the Icon model is saying, they're currently out to 96 hours now. The model initializes, it takes some time to process the whole run. It's out to the end of day 4. Or should I say the start of day 4. No, it's the end, isn't it? 96 hours, the storm towards the US. Again, it's not loading so quickly, so that's not very helpful. The storm does intensify as it moves into the Gulf. Obviously, you've got the caveat about the initialization and how it's initialized like 15 millibars higher than it actually is.
So far, Recon has gotten an extrapolated pressure of 996.5 millibars so far.
And the Icon model there is pretty much going for Louisiana landfall, pretty much like the NHC cone. So,
does the Icon model follow the NHC cone like point for point?
no, not quite. From what I see on the cone here, as it does that northwest to north bend, the Icon exaggerates it a bit to the west, and then it moves northeast.
Either way, this storm is intensifying, and I'll have to see what models are gonna say. And it's quite curious to me, at least, how weak the actual models are taking the system as it goes into the Gulf of Mexico. I wonder if that's just due to how small the storm's going to be, or if they're picking up on something else that we're not
The storm
seeing.
is small, and the global models do tend to struggle with that, as we saw with Gonzalo, when they had everything from it not even existing, the entire run, or becoming a borderline major.
I don't even know how you remember that. It feels like ancient history now.
It was a particularly notable storm given how unpredictable it was and how quickly it ended up dying, thankfully.
Why has the season had so much shear even though we have a La Nina? I don't think it has had that much shear, has it?
Back in July, it had record equaling low shear, but nothing was becoming particularly intense because there was a lot of dry air. So it's
Sahara dust is what we were talking about the whole time, wasn't it?
Yeah, a lot of dry air early on, and then the dry air went away, and there was a short-term event that happened to coincide with the disappearance of the dry air that introduced shear, and then that went away, and now we're seeing these rapid intensifying systems in the Caribbean.
In about 5 minutes' time, we'll have more info from the recon planes, and you'll hear our interpretation of it right here. As of right now, though, the latest forecast from National Hurricane Center, the advisory, at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, is that it has winds of 70 miles per hour, moving west at 8, with a pressure of 983 millibars. Hurricane warning in effect for Pinar del Rio in Cuba, Tulum to Rio Lagatos in Mexico, including Cozumel and Cancun and many other locations along the coast, along the peninsula. Hurricane watch for Artemisa in Cuba and the Isle of Youth. A tropical storm warning for the Cayman Islands and the Isle of Youth, and a tropical storm watch for La Habana in Cuba. I think actually we should talk a little bit about the Cayman Islands because that is the most immediate location to this storm. What would you suggest for them right now?
I would suggest that they prepare for tropical storm conditions, strong tropical storms, potentially, I would expect damaging tropical storm force winds of 60 miles an hour or greater. I wouldn't necessarily expect hurricane conditions given it keeps going west, but it can't be ruled out, and to be honest, if you're being safe, you should prepare as if this is going to bring hurricane conditions to the westernmost island.
Grand Cayman.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get the long loop to load, but as you can see, it's really stuttering, so we'll just have to stick with the short. The problem is with this that we can't show you the storm in relation to the Cayman Islands. The only outlines you can see on this map are Jamaica. You can't see Cuba there. Jamaica quite obvious, and on the very bottom left hand side is Central America, Honduras and the border with Nicaragua there. That's all you can see on that graphic just now.
The good news is that the Cayman Islands have a 200 nautical mile radar that we can just see the very edge of Delta moving into. We can see the outer bands. So 12 hours or so we might start to see the eye.
Interesting.
Could give us some structural insight.
Definitely. So that's something we'll be watching much more closely tomorrow, I would think.
Yes, the Air Force recon plane is registering on the flight. It started transmitting its location, so that'll be taking off shortly to head for Delta.
And I think that's going to be needed with this ongoing.
It will be getting there around the time of the next NHC full of half advisory.
Do they time that deliberately?
It was going into Gamma, but they rescheduled it to hit Delta at the same time.
Interesting, yeah.
So it'll be arriving just after, I think.
Oh, okay. Send in your questions. We'll probably only be here for a few more minutes whilst we wait for new recon data. Suggestions that it's definitely forming an eye wall on the 1 minute imagery. Just to confirm that, Kay, you think it does have an eye wall?
Let me look at this again. I wouldn't say it has a visible eye wall, but I would say that there's a clear curvature to the convection.
Let's see if we can get the this variety of imagery is known as the sandwich imagery, which sort of blends some visible aspects with the infrared, and I must say, it doesn't look as good as visible on that, or maybe those late frames. Let's just watch that again. Watching it with everyone else here. And those latest frames could be curving round an eye there. Maybe. Hard to tell.
Based off of the reconnaissance fix, that is roughly where the center is.
Well, that's
So
interesting.
that blurry radar reflectivity in the far edge of the range that's being partially obscured by convection that's nearer to the radar is where the eye is. But obviously it won't be representative of the structure because it's too far away to see properly. And it would only be picking out the most intense parts, which might not necessarily show the true structure.
Alright. So, this is the latest on Tropical Storm Delta, which is most likely about to become a hurricane and still progressing across the Caribbean westwards at around 8
The
miles.
extrapolated pressure has dropped
spoken out, Chapel.
significantly. The extrapolated pressure is down to 978. The flight level winds are 60 knots and the SFMR supports 70 miles an hour at this time.
The pressure dropping,
Not
though,
yet.
that's the key feature here because that sets the foundation for those higher wind speeds.
We need to wait for the drop sonde to make any concrete observations because the extrapolated pressures will be different because the plane has gained 150 millibars in pressure height. It's gone up to a higher altitude because the storm is more intense than expected. So we can't make any direct comparisons yet, but it appears to be strengthening. It appears that 70 miles an hour was the right call now.
But your hunch is that it's still strengthening significantly?
Absolutely.
Yeah, mine too.
Nothing to suggest it's slowed down.
So there we are. Again, this is the latest 1-minute satellite imagery rapid scan of Delta, which looks like it's going to become another hurricane in this marathon hurricane season, the 26th tropical cyclone of the year in this basin, bearing in mind that the average named storm count by the end of the year is 12. Just think about that one for a little while. We will be finishing as soon as we get some definitive information from that centre pass. So
We actually had higher flight level winds in the southeast than the northeast.
really,
Yes.
all right,
I can't. Oh no, that hasn't updated yet.
okay.
That particular thing I was looking at.
Well-
Okay, yes. Ooh.
Send in your questions in the meantime, though. We'll try and get through some. Why is the pressure so low for a tropical storm? Is this latest question here?
Because of how rapidly it's intensifying, the winds haven't been able to catch up to the pressure yet. And this is a common thing in rapidly intensifying storms. My favourite example of this is Michelle 2001, whose wind speeds peaked at 12 hours after the pressure began to rise.
Wow. That is quite impressive.
Yeah. The pressure peak and wind peak were 12 hours apart, and it wasn't re-intensifying, it continually weakened from that point to landfall. But we have 63 knot flight level, which is just below hurricane strength.
Oh, wow.
And we have a flagged SFMR of 61 knots, but the highest unflagged is 57.
Alright, so still just hanging back from hurricane status then?
Yes. But there is very clearly a significant wind lag in this storm, which shows just how rapidly it's intensified.
That appears to be pretty clear, and visible appearance looks a lot better than many 70 mile per hour storms. Looks can sometimes be deceiving, but it's the wind that's perhaps deceiving us this time.
Yes. But these winds will start to catch up with the pressure, and but the point is that this pressure will continue to be ahead of the wind until it stops dropping, and that may be at landfall. So it may peak at landfall because the winds would still be increasing even if the pressure stops increasing.
I'm not sure why these images are loading more slowly than we started tonight, but there's another look once again at the Gulf region, Yucatan. This is supposed to be an animation. There's Gamma, weakened to a depression now, and not looking very good. You can actually see a little bit of Delta there on the right hand side of the image, but I don't think we're getting anywhere with that. I keep trying. We try and show as many views as we can. Of course, the 1 minute imagery is quite interesting because you can see what's happening in near real time, but sometimes it's good to get a perspective to see how it's been looking over a 6 or 12 hour period, or zoomed out a little bit more, because sometimes storms can look a lot stronger simply because it's zoomed in.
It might be nearer the top of the hour that we get the pressure reading, the new eye assessment from the vortex data message.
So we're thinking it's going to be down into the 970s now.
It's almost certainly lower than 983. It might not be. It might be at 980 because the extrapolated pressure is supporting 978, and you're typically at 1.62 millibars for that at 700 millibar height.
I guess we'll leave it there then for now.
I would estimate it's around 980 and rapidly dropping.
So there we have it. Tropical Storm Delta on its way by the looks of things to hurricane status and likely to intensify maybe a lot more. National Hurricane Center forecasting a Category 3 peak now. If you missed that earlier, hurricane warnings now in effect for the Yucatan Peninsula. And maybe it will just miss the Cayman Islands as it moves on through the Yucatan Channel, or maybe a landfall, and then eventually by the weekend or Friday onto the US Gulf Coast. Thanks very much to my team for putting on this coverage tonight on mainly Tropical Storm Delta, but also everything else that's out there. Gamma down to a depression, Tropical Storm Chan-Hom in the Western Pacific, which could threaten Japan as a typhoon, and the newly developed Tropical Depression 19E in the Eastern Pacific, which shouldn't be affecting any land areas. You can stay up to date with us on our social platforms on Facebook and Twitter, search Force 13 all in text. You can also join our very busy Discord server, discord.gg/Force13 for live chat, and I think our team might be in a call there a little bit later on as well. I think Strat did that last night, and he loved the attention, something like that. Anyways, that's it from us tonight. For now, we'll have more live coverage tomorrow, I'm pretty sure, along with storm updates on our YouTube channel. My name is Nathan Foy. I was joined by many people from our team tonight, and saying goodnight from us here is Ethan, Christian, Jacob, and Kay. You've been watching Force 13 Live. We'll be back with you probably very soon, given this storm.